From the moment 10-year-old Elijah Eli Vance, a prodigy forged in poverty, played a profound, heartbreaking Beethoven sonata on a chipped keyboard amidst the roar of a Harlem street corner, his destiny was set. Discovered by the ruthless, wealthy magnate Marcus Thorne, Eli is instantly catapulted out of his meager existence and into the suffocating discipline of the classical music elite. This is a story of a brilliant, fast ascent to global fame and fortune, where the music becomes both a gilded cage and the only weapon a boy has left to fight for his soul against the powerful man who owns his future. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The city didn't whisper secrets. It roared them, a cacophony of screeching tires, distant sirens, and the percussive slam of dumpster lids. For 10-year-old Elijah Eli Vance, this chaotic symphony was the backdrop to his private, precarious concert hall, the sun-dappled, trash-strewn corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. His instrument wasn't a gleaming grand piano on a polished stage, but a chipped, second-hand Casio keyboard resting precariously on a milk crate and a stack of flattened corrugated cardboard boxes. Eli was small for his age, a fact accentuated by the oversized, faded hoodie that swallowed his frame. His knees, perpetually dusty, peeked out from torn jeans. But when his fingers, long, nimble, and surprisingly strong, drew near the plastic keys, a transformation occurred. The slouch vanished, replaced by a deep-seated intensity that pulled his eyebrows together. The noise of the city, which could so easily drown out a street performance, seemed to recede from his consciousness. For Eli, the music wasn't just a sound, it was an invisible, all-consuming force field. He wasn't playing the popular, catchy tunes that usually drew quick coins from passers-by. Today he was wrestling with Beethoven's pathetic sonata, first movement. A bizarre choice, perhaps, for a street corner, but it was the only piece that matched the churning, desperate ambition in his gut. The piece demanded depth, a melancholic fire he somehow possessed. His left hand laid down the somber, powerful bass notes, the grave, with a maturity that belied his years. His right hand danced, hesitant then bold, through the arpeggios of the Allegro di molto e con brio. It wasn't perfect. The Casio couldn't handle the dynamic shifts of a piano, often clipping the crescendos into tinny, digital squawks. But the intent was there. The passion was undeniable. Eli played not for the scattered change, though every penny counted, but to escape. The music was a temporary portal out of the cramped, mildewed, single-room apartment he shared with his mother, out of the gnawing hunger that was a constant companion, and out of the fear that his mother's unpredictable cough would someday be more than just a cough. On the keys he wasn't poor or small or worried. He was a force. A small crowd began to gather. It was a typical Harlem mix. A construction worker on break, a woman with shopping bags, a group of teenagers skeptical until the sheer force of the music made them pause. The coins that dropped into his battered tin cup were mostly nickels and dimes, a few quarters. He kept his eyes closed, the way his late grandmother, who had first sat him on her knee at an upright piano, had taught him. "Feel the music, Eli," she'd said. "Don't just play it. If you feel it, they will feel it." He played until his shoulder muscles ached, pouring every ounce of his energy into the tumultuous shifts of the sonata. When he finally finished, the silence was thicker than the surrounding noise had been. He opened his eyes, blinking against the late afternoon sun. The small group gave a hesitant round of applause. Eli offered a shy, quick nod, then bent to retrieve his cup. His fingers brushed the cool metal, about $5, maybe $6. Enough for bread and milk. He was about to disconnect the power adapter when a new voice cut through the street chatter. It wasn't the usual, hurried compliment or a quick request for an easier song. This voice was low, smooth, and resonant, carrying a distinct, polished authority. "Play that again. Every single note." Eli looked up. Standing a few feet away, separate from the shrinking crowd, was a man who looked like he'd been dropped onto 125th Street from a completely different universe. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit that looked like it cost more than Eli's entire family owned. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes, framed by expensive, sleek glasses, were fixed solely on Eli and his cheap keyboard. He held a leather briefcase so thin and smooth it looked like a prop from a movie. This wasn't a tourist. This was a man of power, effortlessly exuding wealth and control. Eli froze. He recognized the man vaguely from a magazine cover his mother sometimes read at the bodega. Marcus Thorne. The name resonated with a faint, almost mythical quality. Real estate titan, philanthropist, a man who owned chunks of the skyline Eli could see from his street corner. Sir? Eli managed, his voice a dry croak. Thorne didn't smile. His expression was serious, almost intense. The Beethoven. The intensity in that grave. The audacity of your tempo in the allegro. You have fire, boy. Now play it again. From the top. I need to know if that was a fluke or if I just stumbled upon a miracle. The word miracle hung in the air. Eli looked from the man's uncompromising gaze to his own grimy keyboard. The sudden, immense pressure was paralyzing. He was used to ignoring the crowd. He couldn't ignore this man. He swallowed hard, his hands momentarily slick with sweat. I don't know all of it, Eli confessed, the lie stinging his lips. He knew every note. But the fear of disappointing this colossal figure was greater than the urge to perform. Thorne's dark eyes narrowed, a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He took 2 deliberate steps closer, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't pull out money, he pulled out a slim, expensive-looking fountain pen and a small leather-bound notebook. $10, Thorne said, not as an offer but as a statement. He placed a crisp bill on the keyboard. $10 for the next 5 minutes. Play until I tell you to stop. Play only for me. The audacity of the gesture, the sheer arrogance of commanding his private attention, jarred Eli out of his fear. He felt a sudden, familiar surge of defiance, the same one that made him choose Beethoven over pop songs. He didn't pick up the $10. He pushed the bill aside. I play for the music, Eli said, his voice surprisingly steady. Not for the minutes. Thorne paused, the pen hovering over the notebook. For the first time, a genuine, if slight, smile touched his lips. It was a smile of approval, of recognition. Good. Pride. I like that. He put the pen and notebook away. Now play. Eli took a deep breath. He closed his eyes again, not to escape this time, but to focus. He brought his hands down on the keys, launching into the sonata with renewed, almost ferocious energy. He played the grave with a heavier touch, letting the deep tragedy of the chords resonate. When he hit the allegro, he pushed the tempo faster, cleaner, correcting the small mistakes he had made earlier, fueled by the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that one of the most powerful men in the city was giving him his full, undivided attention. He played for a full 10 minutes, sweat beading on his forehead, his body swaying with the music's rhythm. When he ended the tumultuous passage, his heart was pounding like a drum. Thorne didn't applaud. He simply nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than a standing ovation. Your name, boy, Thorne stated, his voice now softer, analytical. Elijah Vance. Eli. Eli Vance, Thorne repeated, testing the sound of it. Tell me, Eli, where do you practice? That machine is a toy, but your technique, your touch, it's been honed. Eli pointed vaguely toward the dilapidated, 7-story brownstone a block away. My friend's building. His apartment has an old upright. I play there when his mother lets me. The rest of the time I play this. He patted the Casio. Thorne's gaze swept the street, the worn-out buildings, the refuse. He looked at the keyboard, then back at the boy. The assessment was quick, ruthless, and complete. He saw the talent. He saw the hunger. And he saw the circumstance, the poverty that was a ticking clock on this potential. He pulled out a business card, thick and embossed, and pressed it into Eli's palm. It felt like a credit card, heavy, formal, alien. The paper was cool against Eli's callous skin. Eli Vance, I can offer you a shortcut. A colossal, game-changing shortcut, Thorne declared, his words crisp and decisive. I don't deal in small stakes. I deal in opportunity, and I recognize it when it stands before me. You are a talent that belongs on a concert stage, not a street corner. He didn't wait for a reply. Thorne didn't ask, he told. Be at this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. It's my office. As for me, tell the security desk your name. You bring your mother. We will discuss your future. Do you understand? Eli looked from the card, a golden-hued emblem of an empire, to the man's uncompromising face. The world had tilted on its axis. He thought of his mother, exhausted and worried, coughing into her fist. He thought of the upright piano at his friend's house, the one with 3 sticky keys. 9 a.m., Eli whispered, clutching the card so tightly the edges dug into his palm. Excellent, Thorne said, a hint of satisfaction now in his tone. He turned, his dark suit blending into the shadows of the approaching evening, his departure as abrupt and impactful as his arrival. He hadn't asked if Eli wanted this. He had simply laid down the gauntlet and assumed acceptance. Eli watched him disappear around the corner, leaving behind a silence that felt deafening. The city's noise rushed back in, but it sounded different now, less a roar of chaos, more a potential overture. He looked down at the Casio. It was still a cheap toy on a milk crate. But the business card in his hand, bearing the name Marcus Thorne, was the ticket to a world he had only ever entered through the sound of music. The fear was still there, a tight knot in his stomach, but now it was overshadowed by a reckless, soaring hope. He packed the keyboard and hurried home, the first faint chords of a completely new life already beginning to play in his head. The concrete rhapsody was over. The movement toward the symphony was about to begin. The Marcus Thorne building was a monument to vertical ambition, a glass and steel obelisk that stabbed the morning sky with unapologetic confidence. For Elijah Eli, Vance and his mother Miriam, the journey from the bus stop to the lobby felt less like a walk and more like an unauthorized passage into a forbidden land. Miriam kept smoothing her best, slightly too tight church skirt and fussing over the knot in Eli's borrowed, clip-on tie. She was a woman hardened by worry, her face a map of sleepless nights, but today a fragile, disbelieving hope flickered in her eyes. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed voices. It smelled of expensive coffee and abstract power. Eli, clutching his Casio keyboard case, the only piece of his world he felt safe taking into this one, stood gawking. Everything here was a shade of cool gray or polished silver. Even the air felt filtered. At the security desk, a man in a crisp uniform regarded them with an expression of practiced neutrality. Miriam stammered, "We're here to see Mr. Thorne. My son Elijah Vance." The guard didn't look up. He scanned a list, paused, and then inexplicably, a respectful warmth entered his voice. "Ah yes, the appointment is confirmed. Please take the express elevator to the penthouse suite, 85th floor. Miss Chen will meet you." The ride-up was an exercise in vertigo. The elevator was lined with dark wood paneling, and the numbers flashed by with impossible speed. Eli looked out the sheer glass wall as his neighborhood shrank into a colorful, insignificant square below. He felt a profound disconnection, as if the ground had betrayed him. The penthouse suite was more hushed, more expansive, and more intimidating than the lobby. It wasn't an office, it was a curated environment of calm brutality. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing over a massive antique mahogany desk. A young, fiercely efficient woman named Miss Chen greeted them with a cool but not unkind smile and led them to a seating area arranged around a low, glass table. Then Marcus Thorne appeared. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply materialized from a side doorway, holding a ceramic mug. His presence, even in a relaxed stance, was commanding. He was wearing an expensive, tailored blazer over a fine-gauge sweater, less formal than the day before, yet still radiating untouchable wealth. "Miriam Vance." "Eli," Thorne said, his voice flat, professional. He didn't offer a handshake, maintaining a deliberate distance. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Miriam, overwhelmed, managed a breathy, "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. This is very kind of you." Thorne dismissed the sentiment with a slight tilt of his head. "Kindness is irrelevant. I deal in investment. I saw a rare, volatile asset on a street corner yesterday, and I intend to maximize its return. Let's dispense with the pleasantries and discuss the terms." He took a seat opposite them, steepled his fingers and began to speak, his words clipped, articulate, and wholly focused on the transaction. He laid out a proposal that sounded like a fever dream to Miriam and an impossible challenge to Eli. "Elijah possesses a level of natural talent that is frankly wasted on that toy," Thorne stated, nodding toward the Casio case. "His technique is already advanced, but his foundation is lacking. He needs immediate, intense intervention. I have taken the liberty of contacting Maestro Anton Kleist in Berlin, arguably the world's foremost pedagogue of classical piano. He rarely takes private students and never one so young." Miriam swallowed hard. "Berlin. That's part one," Thorne continued, ignoring her distress. "Part two. Eli will be pulled out of public school immediately. Miss Chen will arrange for a full-time, private tutor specializing in advanced arts curricula, focusing on music theory, history, and languages. His life will become compartmentalized: study, practice, rest. Nothing else. Part 3. You, Miriam, will be relieved of your current circumstances. I will arrange a suitable apartment in a safer, quieter neighborhood closer to the designated practice facility. You will be free to focus on your health and on supporting Eli's career, not on rent or groceries. I will cover all reasonable living expenses, medical care, and educational costs for the next 5 years. He paused, letting the sheer weight of the offer settle. A 5-year guarantee of security and opportunity. And what do you get in return, Mr. Thorne? Miriam finally asked, her voice trembling but firming with a mother's natural suspicion. Thorne finally gave a genuine, thin-lipped smile. That, Miriam, is the only simple part. I get a contractual stake. For the duration of this agreement, and for the following 5 years of his professional career, I will serve as Elijah's executive patron and manager. I will invest the capital, build the brand, and secure the venues. In return, I will take a standard 10% management fee from all his future earnings. Concerts, recordings, endorsements, everything. He made it sound fair, even generous, given the scale of his investment. 10% for a future worth millions. 90% for a boy who currently made $6 in a tin cup. Miriam looked at Eli, her eyes pleading for a cue. Eli was no longer looking at his mother. He was looking at the panoramic view of the city, at the endless possibilities stretched out before them. He was listening not to the words but to the promise of a real piano. Mr. Thorne, Eli interjected, surprising them both with the clarity of his voice. I don't need a new apartment or a tutor. I need to know about the practice facility. Where is it? Thorne's eyes, which had been fixed on Miriam, shifted to Eli with renewed interest. It's a brownstone in the West 80s. It houses a climate-controlled studio. And yes, it holds an exceptional instrument. A Steinway Model D concert grand. It's yours, Eli, for as many hours a day as your hands can manage. The Steinway Model D. The very name was a chord, rich, full, perfect. Eli had only ever read about it in books, the mythical king of pianos. The image, powerful and resonant, eclipsed all other fears. I accept, Eli said, his small voice echoing in the vast room. Miriam looked horrified. Eli, we need to read the contract. We need a lawyer. You will have both, Thorne assured her, calmly picking up a folder. A standard, ironclad contract reviewed by my team. Miss Chen will arrange for an independent legal counsel, one of your choosing, to review the terms. You will have 48 hours to sign. But understand this, Miriam, the timeline is aggressive. Maestro Kleist is retiring. His offer to take Eli is immediate or not at all. This opportunity will not wait for bureaucratic deliberation. The life you want for your son is right here. He tapped the contract. We start tomorrow. The ultimatum was brutal but persuasive. He wasn't simply offering a gift. He was offering a war chest for Eli's future, provided they were willing to move at his lightning pace. As Miss Chen ushered Miriam through the necessary paperwork, Eli remained seated, still holding his keyboard case. Thorne walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to Eli. You understand what you just agreed to, Eli? Thorne asked, his tone shifting from manager to mentor, a calculated intimacy. This isn't about playing music for fun anymore. This is about discipline, sacrifice, and perfection. No 10-year-old toys. No friends. No days off. Only the music. Are you prepared to sacrifice your childhood for your destiny? Eli took a sip of the cold water. He looked at the man who held his future, then back at the impossible, sprawling city below. My childhood is a milk crate and a chipped keyboard, Mr. Thorne, Eli said, his young voice hard with certainty. It's already been a sacrifice. I'm prepared to start the work now. Thorne looked at him, not with pity or even approval, but with a deep, calculating satisfaction. He had found a rare thing, a talent matched by a driven, desperate will. A perfect investment. Then the ascent begins now, Thorne said. Less than 2 hours later, Eli and his mother were in a taxi, not heading back to their cramped apartment, but to a temporary, fully furnished executive flat. The Casio keyboard, now an instant relic, was gently placed in the trunk. The Steinway awaited. The vertical ascent had begun. The rhythm of the streets was already fading, replaced by the relentless, demanding tempo of a new high-stakes life. The practice room was less a room and more a sanctuary. It was located on the ground floor of a quiet, meticulously renovated brownstone, its windows overlooking a small, private garden. The air was dry, temperature-controlled, and utterly silent save for the occasional distant sigh of city traffic. Center stage, beneath a focused track light, sat the Steinway Model D concert grand. It was a gleaming, midnight black leviathan, its vast lid raised like the wing of a dormant, powerful bird. For Eli Vance, who had only ever heard the digitized, compressed sounds of a Casio, the first touch was an electrical shock. He pressed a single middle C. The resulting sound was not a chime, but a harmonic eruption, rich, deep, and resonant, vibrating through the wood, the floor, and into his bones. It was a sound that demanded respect, a sound that amplified every flaw and every perfection. His first week was a dizzying blur of new sensations, new rules, and relentless academic catch-up. Dr. Anya Petrova, his private tutor, a sharp-featured woman with a doctorate in musicology and a near-perfect command of 7 languages, wasted no time. Eli's days were immediately structured. 2 hours of intensive academics, algebra, history through the lens of political movements, and German, followed by a brief, timed lunch, and then the core mission, 4 to 6 hours of piano practice. Marcus Thorne's philosophy was simple, terrifying, and effective. Immersion is acceleration. The practice wasn't easy. The Steinway was a tyrant. Eli had technique, but it was raw, shaped by instinct and necessity. The depth of the keys, the resistance of the action, and the sheer volume of sound the instrument produced required a physical mastery he didn't possess. His hands ached. His back muscles knotted. His innate talent, which had once felt like a superpower, now felt like a struggling engine trying to pull a magnificent, heavy train. His training was guided by a video feed and weekly phone calls with Maestro Anton Kleist in Berlin. Kleist was a legend, acerbic, utterly uncompromising, and visible only as a severe face on a high-resolution screen in the corner of the studio. Neen, neen, neen. Kleist would bark, his German accent cutting through the speaker. The Chopin Eli. You are playing the nocturne like a soldier, not a poet. Where is the rubato? You are 10 years old, not a metronome. Your fingers must weep. Weep, I say. Eli would flinch, but he wouldn't stop. Kleist was harsh, but his criticisms were precise, always targeting the musicality and not just the notes. He demanded a depth of emotional understanding that was almost impossible for a boy his age, forcing Eli to find the grief and the longing in the music. Miriam, meanwhile, was adrift in their new, quiet apartment. The financial security was a profound relief. Her coughs seemed less frequent now, but the loneliness was immediate. Eli was gone before she woke and returned after she had gone to bed, exhausted. She tried to visit the studio, bringing him fresh juice and sandwiches, only to be met by the silent, stern presence of Ms. Chin or Dr. Petrova, who managed his schedule like a military operation. He needs rest, Mrs. Vance, Ms. Chin stated coolly one afternoon, blocking Miriam from entering the studio. And focus. This is his working environment. He is preparing for an impossible goal. The impossible goal was their first real benchmark, the Thorne Foundation Gala in 6 months. Thorne had leveraged his social currency to secure a late-slot performance for a virtually unknown 10-year-old at one of the city's most exclusive, media-heavy black tie events. It was a risky, high-stakes debut, a baptism by fire. 3 months into this new life, Eli was suffering from burnout, a concept his 10-year-old brain couldn't articulate but his body felt keenly. He was mechanically proficient. The Beethoven, Chopin, and the demanding Liszt transcendental etudes were now notes beneath his command. But the joy was gone. The music had become a taskmaster. He missed the feeling of the sun on his face, the chaotic energy of the street, and the simple pleasure of choosing his own song. One evening, after an 8-hour session where Kleist had berated him for his lazy phrasing in a Bach prelude, Eli snapped. He slid off the stool, kicked the velvet drape covering the silent Casio case in the corner, and screamed, a raw sound of frustration that was swallowed by the thick studio walls. He collapsed, burying his face in his aching hands. The door opened quietly. It wasn't Miss Chin or Dr. Petrova. It was Marcus Thorne. He rarely came to the studio, preferring to manage from above, but now he stood there, observing the defeated boy. Thorne didn't offer a platitude. He didn't ask if Eli was okay. He simply walked to the Steinway and opened the lid to the key cover. "My father," Thorne said, his voice unusually soft, "was a dock worker. He believed in one thing: leverage. He said the world doesn't reward hard work. It rewards the person who works hard on the right thing at the right time." He sat down on the stool, his expensive suit material hissing against the leather. Thorne wasn't a professional musician, but he possessed a rudimentary ability. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. It wasn't a classical piece. It was a simple blues-tinged improvisation, a deep, complex melody built on mournful, minor chords. It was rough, soulful, and deeply familiar. It sounded like the streets. It sounded like Harlem. Eli lifted his head, mesmerized. It was music not from a score but from the gut. It was a reminder of the sound he had played for himself before the contracts and the grand pianos. Thorne played for 3 minutes, then lifted his hands, letting the final chord decay into the oppressive silence. He turned to Eli. "This piano is a tool, Eli," Thorne said, his dark eyes intense. "It doesn't care about your tears. It only responds to your will. Christ teaches you how to master the music of the past. But you must learn to master the music of you. You came from nothing. That's your leverage. That fire in the sonata, the one that made me stop on the street, that was yours. This is the price of admission. You endure the pain of the work so that one day when you sit down at this instrument, you can play your own song for the world. You want out of the cage? Then the cage has to be perfect." He stood up, the spell broken, and walked to the door. 5 months until the gala. Get back to work. The exchange was short, brutal, and paradoxically, exactly what Eli needed. Thorne hadn't offered comfort. He had offered a purposeful brutality. He'd given Eli permission to hate the work, provided he respected the instrument and the goal. Eli looked at the magnificent, demanding Steinway. He walked over, ran his hand over the polished finish, and then returned to the stool. He opened the Bach prelude, but before starting he played 2 quick, heavy chords, C minor, then G major, a fleeting echo of the blues his patron had just played. Then, with a renewed surge of defiance and disciplined focus, he bent his head to the score. The joy was still absent, but the determination had returned, harder and sharper. He wasn't playing for Marcus Thorne or Maestro Kleist, or even for his mother. He was playing for the 10-year-old on the milk crate, fighting his way onto a stage that was now less a dream and more an inevitable destination. He would master the tyranny of the grand piano, and then he would make it sing his song. The long haul had begun. The 6 months leading up to the Thorne Foundation Gala evaporated in a ruthless regimen of study and practice. Eli had shed the last traces of his street-corner demeanor, replacing the slouch with a disciplined posture born of long hours at the Steinway. His hands, once calloused from carrying his Casio, were now sleek and powerful, capable of executing complex arpeggios with surgical precision. He had internalized Marcus Thorne's mantra: perfection is non-negotiable. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a vast, ornate chamber dripping with crystal and gilded trim. For Eli, the contrast between this room and the mildewed walls of his former life was so stark it felt like a hallucination. He stood backstage, the thick velvet curtain a barrier between him and the suffocating elegance of the city's elite. His outfit was a tailored tuxedo, the fine wool a stark contrast to his faded hoodie. His mother, Miriam, now dressed in a simple but elegant gown provided by Thorne's staff, stood beside him, pale with a mixture of pride and terror. Her hand gripped his shoulder, her anxiety a palpable weight. "You're going to be wonderful, baby," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Just play for yourself." Marcus Thorne approached, his appearance utterly composed, a black-tie general surveying his troops. He ignored Miriam's sentimentality and addressed Eli directly, his voice a low, precise murmur. "Forget yourself, Eli. Forget the audience. Forget the notes. You are not a boy, you are an instrument of commerce tonight," Thorne said, his words landing like cool, hard pebbles. "I haven't invested 6 months and a fortune for wonderful. I've invested for a cataclysm. You need to dominate the room. You need to make them forget the champagne and the canapes. Your performance is a statement of intent." Thorne clapped him once sharply on the shoulder and walked toward a side door, leaving Eli to confront the immense pressure. He felt the familiar dread, the fear of disappointing this powerful man who had rewritten his world. The music had been his escape, now it was his duty. A soft, amplified voice from the stage announced the next segment, a brief introduction by Thorne himself, followed by a debut performance by a singular talent discovered right here on the streets of New York, Elijah Vance. The curtain pulled back. The sheer volume of the audience, hundreds of wealthy, bored and skeptical faces, hit Eli first. They were glittering in jewels and expensive fabric, a collective judge awaiting entertainment. The lights were blinding. His heart hammered against his ribs. He walked to the center stage Steinway, the same model he practiced on every day, yet it felt alien under the harsh stage lights. He sat down, adjusted the stool and placed his hands on the keys. His gaze caught Thorne's across the room. The man offered no encouragement, only a cold, focused stare that demanded success. Eli closed his eyes. He didn't think of the stakes. He didn't think of the Steinway. He forced his mind back to the rhythm of the concrete, the chaotic energy of the street. He remembered the feeling of playing the pathetic on the Casio, not for mastery but for survival. His chosen piece was Frédéric Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Op. 23. It was a monumental, terrifying piece of music, a narrative of tragic intensity that Maestro Kleist had insisted was years beyond his technical and emotional grasp. Eli was playing it anyway, a calculated risk by Thorne designed to showcase not just talent but audacity. He began with the opening bars, the quiet, narrative introduction. His tone was immediate, commanding silence. He played the theme with a heartbreaking simplicity, conveying the melancholic beauty of the melody. The room, which had been buzzing with polite, detached chatter, fell into an absolute, breathless hush. The sound of a cough, a fork clinking against porcelain, vanished. As the piece progressed, Eli found his focus. The technical difficulties, the rapid scales, the thundering chords, the lightning-fast octave passages, were now second nature. He was no longer thinking about his aching hands or the stage lights. He was inside the music's architecture. He allowed the intensity to build, pouring his suppressed fear and his desperate ambition into the keys. When the music reached the presto con fuoco, the climactic torrential coda, Eli unleashed the full, terrifying power of the Steinway. His body rocked with the rhythm, his fingers a blur, striking the keys with a controlled ferocity. The sound was not just loud, it was massive, an emotional explosion that filled the ballroom, a pure, distilled expression of triumph and tragedy. It wasn't just 10-year-old talent, it was a profound, mature interpretation. He struck the final, devastating G minor chord. The silence that followed was immense, heavy with a collective holding of breath. Then the reaction came, a tidal wave of applause. It was not the polite clapping of a satisfied dinner party, it was an authentic, visceral roar. People were rising to their feet. Eli opened his eyes, blinked against the returning light and saw the faces. They were stunned, some with tears glistening in their eyes. He stood, bowing slightly, his entire body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. He looked for Thorne. The businessman was standing but not clapping. He was simply watching, his face unreadable, until, with a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, he allowed a thin, satisfied curve to touch his lips. The nod was confirmation. The investment paid off. As Eli was ushered off the stage, journalists swarmed the perimeter, flashbulbs popping like fireworks. His name was already becoming a commodity. Later that evening, back in the quiet isolation of the executive flat, the phone rang. Thorne, characteristically, didn't waste time on praise. "Excellent execution, Eli," Thorne's voice crackled over the line. "You have achieved your initial objective. The world is watching now. CNN wants a morning interview. The Berlin flight is booked for Monday. Maestro Kleist is waiting." I thought he was training me remotely, Mr. Thorne," Eli stammered, still reeling from the performance. "The remote training was the audition," Thorne corrected. "You passed. Now the real work begins. You will spend the next 3 years in Berlin with Kleist, immersed in the European tradition. You will be learning theory from the masters, not from Dr. Petrova. You will be playing concert halls, not gala dinners. Prepare yourself. Your public success is the new baseline. You can't afford to fail." Eli hung up, the words Berlin in 3 years echoing in the quiet room. He looked at his mother, who had been listening with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Berlin, Eli?" Miriam asked, her voice cracking. "That's so far. Can I come with you?" Thorne said you'll manage things here, Mom. The apartment, the business side. Miss Chun will handle the details, Eli replied, repeating the rehearsed line Thorne's staff had already given him. He knew the truth. Thorne wanted no distractions. He wanted Eli alone, under the absolute control of the maestro. Eli walked to the window. The lights of the city were dazzling, and high above them all, he could make out the distinctive profile of the Thorne building. He had climbed so high so fast that the air felt thin and cold. He was no longer the boy on the street, but he wasn't quite a man either. He was a product, a rising star, a classical music prodigy. The sound of silk and steel, the elegance of the stage and the ruthless edge of his ambition, had opened the door to the world. But the price of the ticket was an ocean of distance from the one person who still saw him as just Eli. The plane was waiting. Berlin was a world of muted colors and disciplined silence, a stark emotional contrast to the frantic pulse of New York. For Elijah Eli Vance, now 11, the city was just the shell around his new hermetic existence. The elegant, perpetually cold apartment, the short drive to the conservatory, and the intense, suffocating proximity to Maestro Anton Kleist. Kleist was not a teacher. He was a tyrant of refinement. He was an elderly man, a relic of a bygone musical era, whose severe eyes and meticulous white hair seemed to absorb all warmth in a room. His studio was a cavern of historical significance, lined with yellowed scores and framed photographs of his own legendary, and now deceased, pupils. He demanded not just technical perfection, but spiritual transmission of the composer's intent. The Liszt B minor sonata, Eli, Kleist would rasp, tapping the enormous leather-bound score with a silver-tipped baton. This is not a parlor piece. This is a journey into the abyss. If you play this, allegro energico, without the Verzweiflung, the despair, then you are merely an automaton. Your hands may be steel, but your heart, my boy, must be broken. Eli's days were a brutal gauntlet of practice, theory, and cultural immersion. He studied German and music history with an intensity that burned away any residual childhood distraction. He lived on a schedule dictated by the maestro, practicing 6 to 8 hours a day, often until his shoulders were locked with pain and his fingers felt alien to his own will. The Steinway Model D was no longer a symbol of hope. It was a tool of excruciating labor. The constant isolation began to take its toll. His only human contact outside of the maestro and the occasional silent assistant was a brief, scheduled video call with his mother, Miriam, once a week. These calls were carefully monitored by Miss Chin, who would often cut the conversation short, citing Eli's demanding schedule. Eli and Miriam talked about her health, the quiet life in the new apartment, and always the promise of seeing each other soon. The warmth of their connection was rapidly being replaced by the formal distance of a celebrity and his primary fan. 3 months into his Berlin training, Eli hit a psychological wall. He was practicing a demanding set of Rachmaninoff preludes. The music was technically overwhelming, requiring a huge span of the hand and a power he had to physically strain to produce. He was playing the same passage, an intricate sequence of chords and arpeggios, for the 53rd time. Suddenly his hands simply refused to move. He lifted them from the keys and stared at the score. The notes swam. He felt a wave of nausea, a profound, chilling emptiness. Kleist, who had been sitting in the shadows of the room, observing with unnerving stillness, did not shout. He simply walked to the piano. "You have stopped," the maestro said, his voice quiet, which was far worse than his rage. "I can't feel it," Eli whispered, the confession tearing at his throat. "I can play the notes, maestro, but I can't feel the music anymore. It's just mechanics. A job." Kleist leaned over, his shadow enveloping Eli. He placed one bony, ancient finger on the score, pointing to a passage marked pianissimo, con passion. "Do you know the difference, Eli?" Kleist murmured, "between a genius and a mere prodigy?" Eli shook his head. "A prodigy plays what is written. A genius plays what is not written," Kleist said, his eyes glittering with a fierce, cold intensity. "You are an astonishing prodigy. You have the speed, the power, the memory. But you have forgotten why you began this. You have exchanged your desperate hunger for my polished control. You are technically perfect and therefore you are boring." He straightened up, surveying Eli's defeated posture. "Your patron Thorne, he gave me one instruction. Make him the best, maestro. Break his will and rebuild his genius. I have broken your will, boy. Now you must rebuild your own fire. Kleist then did something entirely unexpected. He opened a small locked cabinet and pulled out a worn black 3-ring binder. It was filled with manuscript paper, notes penned in a furious, flowing hand. "This is the music of my youth," Kleist said. "The compositions of a young man, desperate to escape a world he hated. They are raw, structurally flawed, full of Sturm und Drang, storm and stress." He placed the binder on the music stand. "For the next week, you are forbidden from touching the score of any master. You will play your own music. If you have none, you will compose it. You will take that pain, the boredom, the isolation, the homesickness, the fear of failure, and you will filter it through the keys. You will find the voice of the boy on the milk crate and bring it to the concert grand." It was a profound challenge, a test of his inner resolve. Eli, initially bewildered, felt a spark of the old defiance return. He closed the Rachmaninoff score and opened the empty pages of a new notebook. He hadn't composed anything since he was 8 little, clumsy tunes on the Casio. He sat at the Steinway for hours, hands hovering over the keys. The classical giants had filled his head with their voices. Finding his own felt impossible. He tried to force a melody, a formal structure, but the results were stiff and dead. Then late one night, alone in the studio, he let go. He didn't try to write a sonata or a concerto. He simply began to play. He started with the low, mournful bass line of a minor key, slow and heavy, a sound that mirrored the rhythmic, industrial clatter of the New York subway. He layered simple, blues-inflected chords over it, the music Marcus Thorne had played for him, the sound of his old neighborhood, the language of his own experience. He played a piece about coldness, about glass towers, and about the sheer weight of expectation. It was an improvisation that lasted nearly 15 minutes, a raw, unstructured outpouring of all the emotions he had been forced to suppress. It was ugly in parts, jarring in others, but it was undeniably his. When he finished, his breath was coming in ragged gasps. He hadn't solved the problem of the Rachmaninoff, but he had rediscovered the fuel. He was no longer playing to satisfy a contract, he was playing to speak. The next morning, Kleist returned and listened in total silence as Eli haltingly recounted his improvised piece. "Good," the maestro said, his face impassive. "Now you know the abyss. The true masters go to the abyss and they bring back a score. You have 1 year left with me, Eli. You will return to the great works, but you will play them not as a copy but as a co-conspirator. You are not just a hand for the past, you are the voice of the future. The technique is the steel, your pain is the silk. Weave them together." The isolation was still there, the pressure relentless, but Eli was fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a well-trained commodity. He was a young artist who had stared into the void of his own silence and had begun the terrifying, exhilarating work of creating his own sound. The Berlin isolator had done its job. It had polished the prodigy and begun to forge the genius. 2 years later, Elijah Vance, now 13, was no longer a prodigy. He was a phenomenon. The initial high-stakes gamble by Marcus Thorne had paid off spectacularly. Eli had graduated from the Berlin isolator with Kleist's reluctant, yet profound, approval, having mastered the repertoire and, more importantly, having found his unique artistic voice. His European debut tour was a whirlwind of sold-out concert halls, from the gilded acoustics of the Vienna Musikverein to the modern severity of the Elbphilharmonie Hamburg. Critics hailed him as the most significant keyboard talent of the new millennium, praising not only his superhuman technique but the soulful, blues-inflected depth he brought to the classical masters. He performed a Brahms intermezzo with the melancholic wisdom of a man twice his age, and a Prokofiev sonata with the brutal, percussive energy of a storm. Eli's life was now a blur of 5-star hotel suites, passport stamps, sound checks, and standing ovations. The world saw a young, brilliant black artist breaking barriers and commanding audiences. But the reality behind the velvet ropes and the flashing cameras was a carefully managed existence built on Thorne's cold calculus. Marcus Thorne had cemented his role as the architect of Eli's career. He didn't just manage, he controlled the narrative. He was always present either physically or through his omnipresent staff. Miss Chin, now his chief of staff, and a rotating team of tutors, publicists, and bodyguards. Thorne curated every interview, approved every photograph, and ensured Eli's public persona was one of dedicated, serious artistry, devoid of the distracting trivialities of teenage life. The financial success was immediate and vast. Eli was earning millions. Thorne, true to his word, had secured his 10% cut, which he frequently cited as the justifiable return on his initial high-risk investment. The remaining 90% was managed in a blind trust until Eli turned 18, with only a small allowance released for his personal expenses. One afternoon, in a luxurious private lounge at the Zurich airport between flights, Eli found Thorne scrutinizing a financial report on his tablet. Eli, tired but resolute, finally brought up the one topic Thorne consistently deflected: his mother. "Mr. Thorne, I need to see my mother," Eli stated, his voice calm, direct, and showing the confidence Kleist had instilled in him. "I haven't spent more than a single day with her in 3 years. I have a 2-week break scheduled before the Asian leg of the tour." Thorne lowered his tablet slowly, his eyes calculating. "Your sentiment is noted, Eli. But sentiment is a distraction. Your mother, Miriam, is comfortable. She is healthy. She has the apartment and the financial security you have provided. She is living the life you promised her. But she's alone," Eli countered, his throat tight. "And I'm earning enough now. I want to buy her a house. A real house outside the city. I want to manage her finances directly, take care of her." Thorne leaned forward, his polished facade cracking slightly to reveal the steel infrastructure beneath. "You will manage nothing, Eli. You are 13. You are a genius on the keys and a naive child everywhere else. The money is protected in the trust for a reason. Your mother's life is managed because I saw the conditions you both came from, and I will not allow poverty's soft gravitational pull to drag you back down." He pressed a key on his tablet and rotated it. Eli saw an overwhelming spreadsheet displaying complex tax structures, investment portfolios, and the exponential projections of his future earnings. "This," Thorne said, pointing to the numbers, "is the scale of your current trajectory. You are a global brand, Eli. If you pause now, if you become distracted by real estate or family obligations, the momentum dies. The press will smell weakness, the demand will drop, and this entire fragile empire will crumble. Your job is to focus on the music. My job is to ensure the empire stands." "But the music is for her," Eli whispered, the simple truth of his motivation fighting against Thorne's relentless pragmatism. "The music is for the world, Eli, because that's what makes the money that buys her security," Thorne corrected, his voice hardening. "You go home for 2 weeks and you invite the press to ask why you're not practicing. You invite the risk of losing your competitive edge. You invite my displeasure." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Thorne wasn't just managing his career, he was managing his loyalty and his guilt. Eli stood up, his small frame now taut with suppressed rage. He wasn't accustomed to being denied, not by Kleist and certainly not by his piano. "I will see her in New York before the Asian tour," Eli stated, turning the denial into a demand. "One evening. No press, no staff. Just me and her." Thorne held his gaze for a long, silent moment. He recognized the shift. The compliant prodigy was morphing into an assertive artist. He had wanted steel in his player. Now he was dealing with the razor-sharp edges of that ambition. "Agreed," Thorne conceded, a flicker of cold satisfaction in his eyes. He preferred a demanding talent over a docile one. "One evening. Your mother will be flown to the private suite in my New York office building. Miss Chun will handle the arrangements. Be ready to board your flight immediately afterward." The brief, cold victory was bittersweet. Eli knew that even this single evening would be heavily controlled, a temporary release of pressure. The flight from Zurich to New York felt endless. When he finally arrived at the penthouse suite, it was the first time he had been back to Thorne's building since the day of the contract signing. The elegance of the room was lost on him now. It felt like a magnificent cage. Miriam was already there. She rushed to him, enveloping him in a desperate, tearful hug. She smelled of the new, expensive perfume he had sent her, but her touch was the familiar, anchoring warmth he had been starved of. For a few precious hours they simply sat and talked, avoiding the subjects of money and music. They laughed about old memories on 125th Street, and for the first time in 3 years, Eli felt like a kid again, not a commodity. As the evening neared its abrupt end, Miriam held his face in her hands. "You're so tall, Eli. You look so much like your father now." She paused, her voice low. "Are you happy, baby? All this, all the music, is it what you wanted?" Eli looked at his hands, the instruments of his fame and his isolation. He thought of the Steinway, the adulation, the impossible standards. "I don't know," Eli confessed, the simple words a stark admission of his internal conflict. "I love the music, Mom. But I hate the silence around it." Before she could reply, Miss Chin appeared at the door, impeccably dressed and utterly emotionless. "Time to go, Eli. Your car is waiting." The cold calculus of the machine had arrived to reclaim its most valuable asset. The reunion was over. Eli hugged his mother goodbye, a deeper, heavier sense of loneliness settling in his chest. He was flying higher than he had ever dreamed, but the air was getting thinner, and the pressure of the ascent was beginning to test the very core of who he was. He walked away from his mother, toward the waiting jet, carrying not his keyboard, but the immense, invisible weight of his destiny. The Asian leg of the tour, spanning 4 months and 7 countries, amplified the isolation Eli felt. He was performing at an extraordinary level, routinely eliciting ovations that lasted 5 minutes or more, but the constant travel and the rigid management structure were draining his spirit. He turned 14 on a private jet somewhere over the Pacific, celebrating with a slice of gourmet cake and a non-negotiable 2 hours of score study. The applause had become a monotone, loud, validating, yet incapable of masking the profound dissonance between his public success and his private emptiness. The conflict with Marcus Thorne became less about where he could go and more about what he could play. Eli's personal compositions, the raw, blues-infused pieces born in Clyde's studio, had become a necessity, a way to channel his suppressed emotion. He would play them secretly, late at night, in the quiet intimacy of hotel ballrooms, finding solace in the unapproved sound. Thorne, however, had an image to maintain. Eli Vance was the inheritor of the classical tradition, a bridge between 2 worlds, but his sound must remain refined. "Your latest improvisation, Eli," Thorne said one morning in Beijing, having reviewed a recording of Eli's private practice session. "The one with the dissonant minor 7th chord cluster leading into that heavy stride bass rhythm. It's vulgar." "It's authentic, Mr. Thorne," Eli countered, his voice steady. He no longer felt intimidated, only deeply frustrated. "It's the sound of the world I came from. It's my music, not Kleist's or yours. Your music is only valuable because it is filtered through the sanctity of the masters," Thorne stated, his tone sharp. "If you want to dabble in jazz or blues, fine, do it when the money stops mattering. But right now, your career is a symphony of precision. You are contracted to perform the agreed-upon repertoire, Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff. They are proven commodities. Your adolescent angst is not." The argument culminated in the lead-up to Eli's biggest concert yet, a televised benefit performance at the Carnegie Hall in New York. Thorne had secured the performance slot not just as a triumphant homecoming, but as a major media event designed to launch the first phase of Eli's lucrative recording contract. The stakes were astronomical. Eli was scheduled to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, a physically and emotionally draining work considered the pinnacle of the romantic repertoire. He knew the piece intimately. It was the work that had broken his spirit in Berlin, and the one he had mastered by rebuilding it. Days before the concert, during a rehearsal with the New York Philharmonic, Eli felt the familiar surge of emptiness. The notes were perfect, the technique flawless, but the emotion felt manufactured, a performance of passion rather than the real thing. He stopped, lifting his hands from the keys, the orchestra's sound abruptly cut short. "Elijah? What is the matter?" the conductor asked, peering down from the podium. Eli looked at the score, the dense, black notes of the Russian master. He looked at the vast, intimidating space of Carnegie Hall. He looked at Thorne, sitting stoically in the balcony box, his arms crossed. That night, in the isolation of the hotel suite, Eli made a decision that broke the contract of silence he had maintained for 4 years. He called his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice low and urgent, away from the watchful ears of Miss Chen. "I'm playing at Carnegie in 3 days. I need you to do something for me." He didn't ask her to come to the concert. Thorne had already arranged for her to watch from a private box, sequestered from the press. Instead, he made a request that reached back to their life before the fame, a small, tangible piece of their past. "Do you remember the old tin coin cup I used on the street? The one with the bent handle?" he asked. "I know it's somewhere in the storage boxes. I need you to bring it to the concert. Just the cup. You don't have to do anything with it. Just bring it." Miriam, startled by the strange request, agreed instantly, her mother's instinct recognizing the desperation in his tone. The day of the Carnegie Hall debut was a high-water mark of controlled chaos. Security, press, sponsors, everyone was there. Eli felt like he was moving through water, disconnected from the reality of the moment. Thorne gave him his final chilling instruction before the curtain rose. "This is the apex, Eli. Your performance tonight is worth a multi-million-dollar commitment. You play the Rachmaninoff. You play it flawlessly. Anything less is a catastrophic breach of trust." The lights dimmed. Eli walked onto the stage to a thunderous welcome. He sat at the piano, the black instrument vast and imposing. He bowed, acknowledged the conductor, and waited for the silence. He lifted his hands. The orchestra raised their instruments. He did not play the Rachmaninoff. Instead, Eli brought his hands down heavily on the keys and launched into the first 4 bars of his own, unapproved composition. The vulgar, dissonant piece Thorne had forbidden. The opening was a profound shock. It began with the aggressive, driving stride bass, a rhythm that was unmistakably Harlem, not Vienna. It was loud, jarring, and entirely gloriously unclassical. The audience, initially baffled, exchanged confused glances. The conductor's hands froze mid-air. In the balcony box, Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, his face a mask of cold, incandescent fury. This wasn't a mistake, it was an act of artistic mutiny, a public rejection of his contract and his control. The breach was financial, professional, and personal. But Eli didn't stop. He played the opening minutes of his composition with a fierce, reckless joy he hadn't felt since he was 10. The piece was a narrative of his journey, the powerful, yearning melody of the street, the precise, technical arpeggios of Kleist's training, and the ultimate, crushing dissonance of his isolation. The orchestra, realizing they were being witness to an unprecedented artistic statement, held their silence. The music shifted, however, moving from confrontation to a haunting, quiet melody. In the sudden stillness of the hall, Eli reached beneath the piano stool, where his mother, on his instruction, had placed the small, battered tin cup. He did not place it on the piano. Instead, he simply clutched it in his left hand, hidden from the main audience view, the cool, familiar metal a grounding presence. Then, with the quiet melody still playing, Eli finally transitioned. Not into the Rachmaninoff, but into the simple, powerful, and deeply emotional first movement of Beethoven's pathetic sonata, the piece he had played on the street corner. The shift was a stunning revelation. The music was suddenly stripped bare, played with the emotional gravity of his journey, linking the world of the cheap Casio to the majesty of Carnegie Hall. He played with a renewed, profound vulnerability, the technical perfection now infused with the soul of a boy fighting for his identity. When he finished the movement, the silence was total. The audience, having witnessed the initial shock and the subsequent raw honesty, erupted not in polite applause, but a genuine scream of recognition and awe. It was the sound of an artist finally free. Eli stood up, not looking at the cheering crowd, but directly at the balcony box where Thorne was standing, a monolithic figure of power whose face was now a roadmap of defeat and rage. The silence between them was the sound of a contract being irrevocably broken. The dissonance of choice had led to confrontation, and in that moment of rupture, Elijah Vance finally found his true note. He walked off the stage, leaving behind the expectation of Rachmaninoff and embracing the terrifying, exhilarating uncertainty of an artist who had just chosen freedom. The aftermath of the Carnegie Hall performance was a media firestorm. It was not just a musical concert, it was a political event. The press coverage was split. One side hailed Elijah Vance as a revolutionary artist who dared to choose his own voice over the corporate machine. The other side, fueled by subtle press releases from the Thorne camp, painted him as an ungrateful, unprofessional child who jeopardized a major financial investment. Backstage, in the small, chaotic dressing room, the expected flood of champagne and accolades was replaced by a single terrifying figure, Marcus Thorne. His face was bloodless, his control so absolute that his fury was colder than any shout. "You have committed professional suicide, Eli," Thorne said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes fixed only on the battered tin cup Eli had placed on the table. "You substituted a $50 million recording contract with a sentimental stunt. You violated the fundamental term of our agreement, my absolute managerial discretion over your public repertoire." Eli, still high on adrenaline but anchored by a profound sense of peace, met his gaze. I played the truth, Mr. Thorne. I'm not a machine for your investment portfolio. I am an artist. The contract requires me to perform. It doesn't require me to become a lie. Thorne scoffed, walking closer. The lie is the very foundation of this business, Eli. You needed structure. I gave you an empire. You needed refinement. I gave you the maestro. I took a child from the street and gave him a destiny. And now you childishly throw it away. You gave me a cage, Eli countered, his voice quiet but firm. A golden cage where the only currency was my silence. I opened the door. The argument was cut short by the appearance of Miss Chen, followed by two men in dark suits who were not security guards, but legal muscle. Thorne dropped the formality. The contract is void. Effective immediately. The trust that holds your earnings? It was established with my capital and managed through my entities. We will, of course, release the small stipend to your mother to fulfill the final agreement on her housing, but the remaining assets, the intellectual property of your performance recordings, the lucrative endorsements, they are now subject to immediate, aggressive litigation. I'll ensure you spend the next decade battling me in courtrooms instead of on concert stages. You will be a cautionary tale. He turned to his staff. Secure all the scores, the practice recordings, and the grand piano in the New York studio. This is an asset recovery operation. Eli's heart sank. He had anticipated the fury, but the cold finality of losing everything, the money, the music records, the instruments, hit him hard. He had won the artistic battle only to lose the financial war. Thorne paused at the door, delivering his final blow. Enjoy your freedom, Eli. Let's see how long the applause lasts when you're back on a milk crate, trying to afford the lawyers needed to fight me. Thorne and his team swept out, leaving Eli, his mother, and the silence. Miriam rushed to him, distraught. Oh, Eli, what have you done? He'll take everything. He's right, Mom. He has the power, Eli admitted, running a tired hand through his hair. He looked at the tin cup on the table, a battered symbol of his beginning. Suddenly, the dressing room door flew open again, but this time, it was not an enemy. It was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic, followed by a flurry of journalists and a distinguished man in a suit, a corporate lawyer, but not Thorne's. Mr. Vance, forgive the intrusion, the lawyer said, holding out a business card. My name is Daniel Hayes. I represent the Rockefeller Sterling Arts Foundation. We watched your performance tonight. We did not see a breach of contract. We saw the emergence of a genuine artistic voice. He spoke quickly, efficiently, cutting through the fear. Mr. Thorne is a powerful man, but he is a bully. Our foundation, along with several high-net-worth individuals in the hall tonight, are prepared to fund your legal defense. Furthermore, we have an immediate offer, a fully paid residency at the Juilliard School, a stipend for your mother, and access to a world-class practice instrument. We want to support the artist who stood up for his right to create. The tide had turned instantly. Thorne's ruthless aggression had ironically generated a powerful cadenza of support. Eli's act of defiance had resonated not just with music lovers, but with rivals of Thorne and patrons who valued art over commerce. The silence that had descended when Thorne left was now filled with the sound of a new, powerful engine starting up. Eli looked from the lawyer to his mother, who was crying tears of immense relief. He had been offered a lifeline, a way to fight the most powerful man in his world without sacrificing his identity. I accept the legal help and the residency, Eli said, his decision instantaneous. He was done with the corporate empire. He was returning to the artistic foundation. In the following weeks, the battle unfolded. Thorne's team filed an aggressive lawsuit, but the public sympathy was firmly with the boy who dared to play his own song. The foundation's lawyers, armed with Eli's unassailable artistic integrity, fought the case on grounds of creative freedom and exploitative contracts. The final settlement was not a complete victory, but a powerful compromise. Thorne retained the rights to the recordings made during the European tour, his financial recoupment, but he was forced to release Eli from any future managerial or financial claim. More importantly, Eli retained the full rights to his own compositions and future works, an explicit admission that his talent could not be legally owned. 3 months later, Elijah Vance, now free and 14, walked into the hallowed halls of Juilliard. He was surrounded not by bodyguards and managers, but by fellow students and dedicated professors. His practice room held a magnificent concert piano, but the atmosphere was one of study and creation, not solitary perfection. He still practiced the masters, but he played them now with a depth of understanding that came from his own struggle. And late in the evening when the halls were quiet, he would sit at the piano and compose his own music, pieces that wove the elegance of Kleist's discipline with the heavy, soulful rhythm of the streets. He often thought of the day he first saw Marcus Thorne, the man who had torn him from poverty and nearly destroyed him with fame. He had seen a path to the sky, and Thorne had provided the elevator, but only on the condition that Eli clip his own wings. Eli Vance had refused. He had jumped out of the elevator, taken the fall, and found that his own voice, his authentic, complex, powerful music, was enough to teach him how to fly. The prodigy was dead. The artist was reborn. His true concert, the life he chose, was just beginning. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.